end, we'll have a Q&A session. So through the whole session, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat as you get them, and I'll collate them and ask them towards the end. And of course, whenever, even towards the end, if you come through, just put them in chat and I'll pick them up. Okay. So just a little introduction of us. We're the Systems Innovation London Hub. So today we're hosting this panel, and it's one of the events, one of the category of events we host, along with other workshops, other in-person meetups as well. And we're essentially a hub, a platform which tries to bring together people and organization with the effort of shared learning and apply systems thinking to different systems thinking methods and tools towards different challenges locally and nationally as well. And we're a part of the larger Systems Innovation Network. So for our today's panel, we have three people on the panel. We have Jos, who is the London team representative. So he's going to host the panel, and our guests are Daniella and Nadim. So I'll ask each of them to introduce themselves, and I'll start with Jos for a little introduction, and then Daniella and Nadim.
Great. Thank you, Minali. Good to see everyone here this evening and get a chance to talk about this topic of ecosystem building. And hopefully myself and Danielle and Nadim will be able to share some ideas that hopefully inspire you to go and do your own ecosystem building. Some examples, but I'm actually going to start with a bit more of kind of foundational stuff around what are we talking about when we use this somewhat abstract word of an ecosystem, and when you try to conceive of what it is, it's quite abstract indeed. So I'm going to try and talk a bit about that and some of the tools and methods and kind of models we have at SI. Maybe you've seen some of them. I'll share the links afterwards. But we have guides and we have both canvases also for doing this sort of stuff. And I'll also talk about one or two examples as we go through. In particular, our London hub is actually a good case study because I've been now 3 years working with the SI London hub. I helped set it up. And we, as Minali mentioned, our platform, we're trying to build an ecosystem here in London, here in the UK for systems innovators and systems changers, and have a lot of personal learnings from that experience so far. So I'm going to share all that. In case you don't know me, I'm part of the SI core team along with Yasmin and Anya and others. I'm also with the London hub. So here we go. Ecosystem building. As mentioned, you'll find a lot of this on our website. Just starting from the beginning, what are we talking about when we say an ecosystem? So it's a network of actors, should we say, individuals or organizations, it can be at different levels, who are working together in some sense or interdependent in some way towards addressing some challenge or creating some overall function or some capacity that none in isolation could achieve. And we're talking here about these systems innovation ecosystems for addressing complex challenges, which is a particular kind, should we say. But if innovation is this function of bringing the right parts together in the right way, right combination, a synergistic way to create new value flows and new functions, well, an innovation ecosystem is kind of doing that at a larger scale, bringing together different actors, different capabilities that they have, and putting them together in the right way around a particular challenge to be able to create an overall function, overall capacity that we couldn't have without them. That's what I mean by an ecosystem, and they take many forms, but we're talking particularly about these ones for addressing wicked challenges when we talk about systems innovation. And I imagine most of you have heard of that term, wicked challenge. We have lots of them. In healthcare is maybe a good example. But we know there's a water crisis. We know in finance, we have, financial instability. We need to work together. Financial fraud also is another example. Supply chains, we need to shift those from linear to circular. And that's a good example. We're not going to get a circular economy our last event we hosted with Daniella. I'm not sure if she's here today, but we were talking about circular economy. And that's, it looks like it's about plastic bottles and all of this, but ultimately it comes back to collaboration and getting a large network of actors to work together in a synergistic way. So it's a good example of a wicked challenge. How can we move from a linear to a circular economy? And we're going to have to build these new networks and whole new capacities, whole new ways of collaborating and working together, because we don't have that at the moment, right? We have manufacturers here and we have, retailers there and so forth, and they work in a particular way along a supply chain. But if we actually want a circular economy, we'd have to reorganize the whole thing and get them working together in new ways. And that we call an ecosystem. And they'd have to be collaborating in new ways. So that's one example. We could definitely think of healthcare as another example, right? If we want to get away from the kind of healthcare system we've known in the industrial age to maybe a more user-centered, integrated healthcare that a lot of countries are hoping for these days, that's going to require a very different organization to that system and a very different way of working for that network of actors. And again, it's going to be an ecosystem, same for supply chains. And that's what we're talking about here in terms of wicked challenges, ecosystems, and of course, ecosystem building is about how we develop and grow and build those ecosystems. And yeah, get away from this situation we currently find ourselves in, where we have these very complex challenges, but we end up actually channeling all our resources back into these individual parts in the system, and a lot of recreating the wheel, and not much real systemic or systematic kind of collaboration between them. And a lot of resources get dissipated. If we take something like homelessness, a lot of organizations trying to, in a linear fashion, solve that same problem, right? We have a solution, we're going to provide a service or a product, and we're going to try and fix this problem. But none of them have that capacity to actually do it. So it's trying to shift that dynamic to the one on the right, because on the left, what happens is you have a lot of resources go into the system, but they all get channeled into these individual parts, and it gets hugely dissipated and not actually coordinated around the challenge. And when you look at it from the individual organizations, it makes sense, right? We're going to save the world, right, with our service, our solution. But when you step back and you look at the bigger picture, you just see so many organizations trying to do the same thing. And we really need to get to the right-hand side, which is more about this new networks for collaboration, putting the challenge in the center and thinking about who can bring what into this ecosystem, what capacity do they have, and how can that be put together synergistically so that we can actually move forwards on this challenge. So hopefully that makes sense to you, that idea. And of course, ecosystem building is about developing and growing those ecosystems. And if you go into many areas, you'll probably find yourself a little bit down at the bottom here, or maybe on the second level, where you have a lot of organizations and they're all trying to do something, but they're not really working together, or these very kind of transactional collaborations going on. And we can think then about how do we get to new levels of collaboration? How do we get new levels of networks form and grow and so forth? And that takes a long time. London is actually now one of the world's leading startup ecosystems, number 2 or number 3 in the world, depending on the ranking. 20, 30 years ago, it wasn't even on the map at all. There were a few startups gathering around what's called Silicon Roundabout here. And that was an ecosystem that was just burgeoning, just a few people at that time. There are a few meetups every now and then. And in the past 20 years, it's exploded and it's grown massively. And now there are, tens of meetups every night and massive amounts of funds and all sorts of ways of connecting the different actors. So it doesn't get born overnight. It takes time, takes investment, it takes a lot of work. And we call that ecosystem building. Key aspects of this ecosystem, it is a different way of thinking. It's more holistic. And the idea of community is actually important. We sometimes forget that, particularly when we talk about kind of tech startup kind of communities or ecosystems. We get caught up on funding and all of this, and we forget that it's a group of people at the end of the day. And it's important to see it like that, even if it's large organizations. It's always people talking to each other. It's a network. And there needs to be some kind of commons, some kind of shared infrastructure, or else it's not really an ecosystem, and they're dynamic. The network of connections is changing over time. Networks are kind of inherently dynamic and evolving. So some of the key aspects, won't go into all of this. When do you need an ecosystem? When don't you? If you have a specific challenge and I want to tackle it as an organization or group of organizations, you don't actually need an ecosystem. You just need a kind of a consortium or something like this, or a collection or a few collaborations. It's when you want a whole infrastructure of collaboration, and long-term ecosystems are long-term infrastructures for addressing complex challenges. And that's why they're particularly well aligned for systems change, because you can't do systems change in 2 years or 3 years. It's this ongoing cultivation of capacity and connections and collaboration. And the ecosystem model fits that perfectly. So it's really what we're doing when we talk about systems innovation. And of course, it takes a type of entrepreneurship. But it's not the usual kind that we know, right? Where we think of starting a new business and creating value in that way, such as systems building, systems entrepreneurship, where we're trying to create value at kind of a network level or an aggregate level of putting all these parts to these organizations and aligning them in the right way to create new value flows. So it does contain that aspect of entrepreneurship and everything that kind of goes with that. And this is Mark Ventresca, the elements in your opportunity. They're all around us. They just need to be combined in new ways. It's kind of what an entrepreneur is. They go into a situation and they don't just see problems, they see opportunities, and they see ways to bring things together in the right way to actually address those challenges. And that's essentially what we're doing. It's the skill of the system builder to see the opportunities, to see how to bring the right parts together in the right way. So that's a little bit of kind of high-level stuff about ecosystems and why they're important and so forth. We do have a canvas on the website, and I'm just going to walk through that a little bit. Won't go into all of it, just to say how we think about going about doing this stuff, right? So there's a few core aspects here. We've got to come up with kind of a story around this whole thing. Why are we getting together? What is this ecosystem about? There are specific challenges, particular areas we'll be working on. There's definitely actors here, and we'll need some kind of a platform or infrastructure for supporting the development of this whole thing. So we can start off with framing. Definitely the best place to start. Start with why. Why are you doing this? What's the purpose of this ecosystem? Otherwise, you can get very lost in all sorts of things. So start with the question of why are we doing it, and create a story around that, a shared language as to what you're doing that can form your culture and sense making, so that people can make sense of what you're doing, why it's important. So creating a narrative is going to really help you a lot in terms of making it so much easier for other people to get involved. You're always going to be trying to attract people into this. Ecosystems, we'll talk about it later, it's not a kind of hierarchical command and control thing. You can't tell people to do stuff. You have to attract them. And a good story, an inspiring story, a creative story is going to be the beginnings of that reason for people to get involved. And people don't get involved in anything if they can't make sense of it. So you've got to have a good story about what this is, why it's important, and why it's of value and of value to them, and then how they can be involved. You have to kind of tick all those boxes, or else people aren't going to be involved, and a good story is kind of key to that. And yeah, just some of the, maybe I'll go back to that one. This is a good little template we have to help you think about that. I'll share the slides afterwards. But just ask the question or try to answer to people, who are the people we're bringing together in this ecosystem? Is it, people who want to clean parks? Is it, entrepreneurs? Is it people in finance, so on and so forth? Who are we bringing together? What are they going to do together? And what will we actually achieve together? Or what can you achieve being part of this, but you can't achieve not being part of it? And what will we achieve together? So kind of key questions there to get you started. I'm going to stay going for the sake of time. How am I doing for time, guys?
We're good. We're 15 minutes into it.
Okay. So the second bit is to think about the challenges. If you have an ecosystem, there's going to be a big challenge. It might be trying to shift to an electric transport system, all our cars being electric by 2030 or whatever you want. That's a big challenge, but there's going to be a lot of sub things that need to be worked together around there. You're going to have to build new capacities around, parking and refueling in terms of the energy supply, battery capacity, new electric cars, people to service it, so on and so forth. There's going to be a whole pile of challenges there that you have to address. So thinking about that and map it out, the different dimensions of that challenge. What are the economic, social factors? What policy needs to be in place? How's the financing going to work to actually pay for all those charging stations? What technology needs to be in place? What companies are going to develop those batteries? What are the environmental considerations, so on and so forth. So those are challenges, and that'll be similar for any kind of ecosystem. You'll have those, and you can post them up. This is what we're going to be bringing the actors together around. And we can then, once we figure that out, we can think about where actually do we want to intervene? What are the most important areas that we want to kind of develop and address as we go forwards? So that's thinking about the challenges. Obviously, the actors and mapping those out are really important. Understanding who they are and why they're showing up, and what do they want to do? What are they going to do when they're part of this ecosystem that would create value for them and actually build the capacity of that ecosystem? We have a template for thinking about the different actors there, and there's different ways of kind of representing that. It all depends on what sort of ecosystem you're trying to build. And you can see here's one. Daniela helped on this one. It's actually built in Kumu. It's a map of the organizations, startups working around climate tech here in the UK, in London. And you can see it's broken out into different types of organizations there: investors, corporates, networks, and so on. We did a workshop in collaboration with the London Hub and Liminal, and had about 30, 40 people from these organizations co-mapping this together and putting in their ideas around these different organizations. And you can see then how, if you get a cluster area, you can think about, okay, those people are all working around climate and food. How might we bring them together and enable them to work together more effectively? So it's just a little illustration of a map. Here's another one of the London Hub. This one's around organizations working in and around purposeful innovation here in the UK. And there's about 240 or 50 organizations there. They're clustered into those different areas you can see. One's in the center. We wanted to, there's many different ways you can represent this, right? It's all depending on what you're trying to do and what you're trying to achieve. So there's no one right answer. This one was representing, okay, what areas do we have? You can see public sector, academia, so on and so forth. And then how transformative is what they're doing in terms of their innovation? Is it incremental sort of stuff and we put them on the outside, the outer circle? Or is it more transformative, more systems change? And you can see it there in the center. So quite a few organizations there in the center. And then as you go out, it's a bit more kind of business as usual innovation. So that's one. They're all representations, visualizations that give us a glimpse into a complex kind of scenario, many different organizations. This one's another one actually with the London Hub we did more recently, and that was organizations. This is individuals. You might be wanting to ask about them. Again, this one's about their level of involvement actually in our hub. So you can see the ones in the center, the people, such as myself and Manali and so on, are core team members or contributing members. And then as you go out to the outer circles here, you can see the members of the hub. So that's another way of representing it and thinking about it. Who are the people who are actually most involved in this ecosystem, or who would most likely be involved or want to get involved in this ecosystem? It's another way of representing it. And then, of course, we have different areas that they're interested in and so forth. So those are the actors. And just think about how you do that. You're identifying who they are. You're trying to understand them. This is actor mapping, and then prioritizing. You think these are very important or not so relevant to the ecosystem. And that's actor mapping. You want to think about, why would they want to be part of this? What could they give and what could they get? When we did that climate tech one, that was a question we're asking the participants. Why would you want to be part of this? What would you want to get from it? But also, what would you want to give to it? Because the thing to remember about ecosystems is it's always about value creation for the actors, or else they're not going to be involved and it's not sustainable. So I'll just, a couple more words and then I'll wrap up. This is the activities. Obviously, they need to be doing something together to build their capacity and build the overall capacity of the ecosystem. Can be things around learning, co-creating, connecting, sharing information and ideas and so forth. And these are all things that we do with our London hub. We've used a similar sort of template to think about that also. So finally, you need some kind of an infrastructure, some kind of a platform or organization to help support and manage the development of this. It's not a centralized kind of hierarchical way of doing things. It's a more decentralized platform that needs to support and nurture and develop a network. It's kind of ecosystem or systems gardening, we might call it. So it takes a very different approach and different parts that would need to be in place, some kind of technology that you need to do this sort of stuff. There'll be some kind of value model, how things are creating value and being monetized and so forth, assessment for thinking about that, and different toolkits and so forth. So that's that. There's obviously governance kind of considerations too, how we'll be governing this whole thing. Here's the template. I'm going to wrap up now, but here's the template we use with those different considerations. So you can kind of walk through those, think about them, ideate on them, and start to develop responses to that. That's what we did with the London Hub. This is just one project I worked on with BFA Global in Africa. It was an entrepreneurial ecosystem for addressing climate change in Africa, in building climate resilient coastal communities. And they started a cohort of startups, this group here, to address this challenge. Each startup was developing a different innovation around building climate resilience and then supporting that ecosystem. So we actually used that template to design this ecosystem with them. It's up and running. It's quite successful at this time. Okay, sorry if that was a lot of presenting. I don't normally do so much of that, but hopefully it was helpful, guys.
Okay, I think if just gonna ask, if there are any questions, let us know to put them in the chat, and then we can take them towards the end, I think. But I think before we start with the panel, if I were to ask Daniella and Nadim to have the introduction of themselves, and then the panel could start.
Sounds great. I think that Nadim is presenting first, so I'm happy for him to go.
Okay.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks so much, Bonali, and thanks, Joss, for framing this conversation and for the introduction. So we do just quick intros, myself and Daniela, and then we jump into the discussions. Yeah.
Yeah, you could start with the introduction.
Okay, so I'll keep it very short because I have something in the presentation as well, but my name is Nadim. I'm based in Berlin. I'm part of the SI core team as well. Yeah, I'm a facilitative consultant working on issues related to systems change and systems innovation. The thread throughout my career, coming from working at the intersection of public and private sector to enable innovation, was the idea of how can we better build innovation ecosystems, and what's the role of policymakers in order to enable the creation of effective innovation ecosystems to promote innovation for sustainability. That's kind of what I'm focusing on right now, but I'll keep more of the details to the presentation that I'll be sharing in a bit.
Thank you, Nadim. Daniella, would you go next for a quick introduction?
Sure, happy to do a quick intro, and I'll also probably expand a bit later, but hello everyone, I'm Daniela, Innovation Delivery Manager at the Digital Catapult, which is the authority on digital technologies. We promote digital emerging technologies. And the reason why I'm interested in developing ecosystems is because it's very important when you are creating new technologies to have an ecosystem that can kind of absorb them. And in the Digital Catapult, we work a lot doing that. So in my previous work experiences, I've been working around systems innovation tools and data science. And I'm really interested in visualizing these ecosystems, making them visible, making the invisible visible. And with some examples that I'm hoping to show you, and I think just show you already, I'm hoping to do that. So I'm looking forward to tell you a little bit more.
Great, thank you so much. Next, Nadim, would you have, is the presentation, would you be starting with?
So I believe Nadim is next.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just let me see if I can make it happen through Canva. Trying this time. Canva. Okay. Let's see. Share my screen. Can you see my presentation?
Yeah, we can see the presentation.
Okay. Yeah. So let me start by saying, I think a lot of the framing that Joss gave us sort of covers much of what I could go into in this presentation. So I think I'm going to keep it light and sort of try to see what we can move into the conversation, go deeper into the conversation. Quickly about how does this work? Okay. Quickly about me. So I'm, as I said, facilitator consultant based in Berlin. And the founder of Cabinet Collective, which is basically a bit of an idea or a concept through which I'm trying to maintain a bit of a career portfolio, let's say, to do systemic relevant work with a bunch of other freelancers and people in the field. And Cabinet Collective is basically a couple of people who are interested in and having backgrounds in different things, including food systems transformation, including a lot of work on the 2030 agenda and the SDGs, some people who have done work with cities, decarbonization, blockchain for impact, Web3, you name it. It's a bit of a mix of skills, experience, personalities. And we've had some initiatives basically where we're able to, participate in projects, say Climate Kick, say UN entities, whatnot, working on issues related to the SDGs, working on food systems projects, on Horizon projects with the EU. And the tools that we put together in a way, or way Cabinet Collective is built is just, it's a bit of, maybe the best way to put it is how somebody explained it, which was, it's a bit of a harbor, right? It's a harbor where we dock, where we come back to regenerate, share our learnings, but we will also take a couple of speedboats to explore some of the topics that interest us, honestly, because in this field a lot of things are emerging, and just wanted to say that what drives me and what has driven this team is a bit of a curiosity approach, and that's why our motto is called Curiosity That Matters. And one of the channels through which we do, or I do some of the work, at least myself, is through a podcast even called Curiosity That Matters, where I interview leaders in the field to learn from them. So without further ado, just to say that, you know, one specific theme throughout my career, throughout the past 12 years, one specific thread has been that of ecosystems. I worked as a consultant earlier in my career, trying to help Canadian SMEs get access to research and development tax credits, which got me interested in, well, how can we better enable innovation at the intersection of public and private sector? Tax credits is a great thing, is you know, a good incentive that was put forth by governments. It's been a while these programs exist, but there might be better ways or more efficient ways to you know, help enable innovation within these SMEs, and what is the role of the public sector in doing that? And I started learning a lot about innovation ecosystems, and basically what I'm going to share today is a bit of how my learning journey evolved, which I think will get us to the conversation maybe that we'll have, the three of us, around how do you build ecosystems? What are the learnings that are embedded throughout the years by so many people that have tried to do this work and are doing this work? And what are the good tools or best practices to use, let's say, if ecosystem building is what you convert yourself as, let's say, a vocation or one of the roles that you take on. And one thing that has been constant in my career, whenever I talk about ecosystems, and I had the role of ecosystem manager in a previous consultancy as well, whenever I bring up we should look at our ecosystem, we should build the ecosystem, we should map the ecosystem, like, okay, we're going to have an ecosystem map, but so what? What do we do with it? Which basically is relevant to the question that Joss was asking and was telling us about before, is the why as well of the ecosystem itself, but engaging in ecosystem work is very relevant. But the so what sticks with me to this day. I built a startup last year that's actually around SDG classification, and it maps or classifies any type of stakeholder within a city to the SDGs. And that question still exists. Is okay, so we have the data, you know, some of the maps perhaps that were shown before. So what? What do we do with them? Who's using them? For what reason? You know, what's the end game? And so I wanted to frame the conversation with two things. One is I like to sort of divide things up into this triangular approach I call ecosystem thinking, seeing, and doing. And the second thing I want to do to frame the conversation is I want to put forth the hypothesis that almost everything that I've learned and that I can talk about today comes back to when talking about ecosystems within systems innovation, comes back to the two-loop model. The resource is missing on the slide, but this is from the SI network, and I will put that link also on the slide deck that will be shared with everyone. But most of you probably know this if you're familiar with the work of the SI network, of the Berkana two-loop model in this. Okay, so quick shot about ecosystem thinking. The evolution has been that a lot of the work started around thinking about ecosystems by categorizing the types of entities and wanting some sort of taxonomy. So we look at what was called the triple helix, that there needs to be collaboration between the public sector, university, and business. So public, academia, and private sector. Quintuple helix, appeared also later, looking at how is that collaboration within society and then within natural environment. There are also a lot of other publications that or research that looked at what other types of entities should we put forth. We look at the public sector, university, civil society, so all embedded within society, and obviously how does that work within the natural environment that we have. My research started a bit in 2015 on this, when I was like, fine, I'm helping companies innovate. I'm interested in entrepreneurship. What is out there to explore this ecosystem approach? And there was Dan Eisenberg's entrepreneurial ecosystem framework to do this. And in a sense, it was quite entrepreneur-centric, right? So it's like an entrepreneur or a startup, so that startup grows, needs to operate within that field and have an understanding or collaboration or relationships or with that ecosystem that you see. So the financial actors, the culture impactors, support organizations, educators, corporations, which is the market, and then policymakers and public leaders. Basically, the growth or success depends on, let's say, some sort of ecosystem that is functioning, that exists, and that has these actors. And I use that to research entrepreneurship ecosystem in Lebanon, whereby we put forth a bit of a hypothesis. The Lebanese central bank was trying to nudge the entrepreneurial ecosystem, if one can say, by injecting $500 billion into the Lebanese economy in a scheme that later was maybe we can go into details about that later. But we just found out, or we used that approach to say, if you really want to push the ecosystem forward, then, or if you want to push the knowledge economy forward in Lebanon, you're best looking at building the ecosystem as a proxy to building the knowledge economy rather than just looking at the finance aspect. And so finance should be something that should be used in an ecosystem approach. But where everything sort of changed for me and I started really understanding a bit more about ecosystems is when I found out about this framework by Elizabeth Hoffaker and her team at the MIT's Practical Impact Alliance, and now called Local Innovation Team, I think. And it basically posits that what's more important perhaps than understanding who are the actors, so networks, government, funders, research, education, CBOs, and businesses within an ecosystem, what really matters is to understand, one, what is the purpose of that ecosystem? And then two, what are the different roles that these actors take on within that ecosystem to help that ecosystem achieve its purpose? And then obviously that all of this plays in within this enabling environment that exists in that specific place and the resources that ecosystem has access to. There's another model which is quite interesting by DEMSOC, Democratic Society, which also works at different actor types and the interactions between them in their democratic climate democracy model. DEMSOC in their climate democracy model, and that comes back full circle to this to the Berkana Tuluk model. Let me just jump. Yeah, I'll skip the seeing because there's a lot of mappings, and I think you'll see also what Daniela did and what Joss showed. And I actually just want to talk about the ecosystem doing. I'm not going to show any slides for that, but maybe I'll put this slide as a visual aid. Oh, sorry. Okay, I'll put this slide as a visual aid for this. Much of what I learned throughout my interactions with ecosystem builders, with policymakers, with engaging in workshops that are about, okay, what framework should we use? How do we approach our ecosystem? What is the purpose of our ecosystem? And engaging in mapping exercises through the startup that I mentioned before. Anecdotally, everything points to the fact that if we consider things quite static as they are in these ecosystem frameworks that I showed, then maybe, apologies. Oh yeah, maybe where we're at, and I think you're all familiar with what's going to happen in this picture, is actually in a way very similar to this, which is we might as well put like an ecosystem map within the room and trying to understand who the actors are. Or we can have even the MIT approach, but still what happens outside is that of a completely emergent interaction between different actors and players. That doesn't mean that mapping or looking at specific frameworks is not helpful. It's a very good starting point, but map is never going to be the territory, just as I think a lot of people, and you mentioned Vidiana before, will say also when we just map the system itself, that is not going to be 100% representation of the territory. And the reason I'm saying this, and I go back to the Berkana two-loop model, is the following. What matters in all of the work that we would be able to do, and if I can, I don't know if I can, no, yeah, my pencil is not working. What matters in all the work that we're trying to do in terms of the ecosystem approach is start where the work is already happening and see as an ecosystem builder, what is it that you can leverage in order to support these initial pioneers, to help them connect and they build these networks going forward. And this has been something that was, in various conversations I've had, it was said, specifically when looking at the context of mission-oriented innovation or challenge-led innovation for ecosystems, and questioning what is the purpose of the ecosystem and why should those people get together to work. It is actually quite interesting to start with the small group of people that are already doing this work and doing this action. And that ecosystem stewardess, I call it, comes at different levels. Example, Impact Hub Berlin, recognition that there's a group of social entrepreneurs, a group of people that are interested in social impact, trying to come together and do this work. When the hub was initially established, it was about being a space for these things. At a higher level, the current government now, obviously with a lot of work done by Impact Hub to lobby and to be present, is recognizing that Impact Hub is one of the major players and is trying to connect them, or by means of knowing much more about them because of their work, can now act as a steward by connecting them also to the right players so that they can create impact at a different layer of that ecosystem. So my approach was, or I'll close with just saying that the frameworks that we have can really help us think about all of the questions and look at the so what of the ecosystem. But at the end of the day, I think there was a quote that Joss also shared a few days ago on LinkedIn, which is social change moves at the speed of trust. And it really is about understanding who are those initial pioneers, what brings them together, how can we foster that trust aspect between them, what are ecosystem, in that case, maybe even community building activities or trust building activities, therefore equating ecosystem building to trust building, and what should be in place, what infrastructures and relational infrastructures should we be looking at enabling and building so that ecosystem can better work together going forward. And I'll leave it there because it's maybe opening with a question and seeing how we can integrate it with what Josh said and what Daniela is going to present now. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Nadim. That was a very insightful presentation and lots of references. And yeah, we already have many who were interested to see and understand the canvases, which will be shared with everyone towards the end of the session today. But I think now Daniela, we could start with you and start with your presentation before, if there are any questions, again, take it towards the end.
Great. Let me know if you can see my screen.
Yeah, we can see a screen.
Fantastic. Well, Nadim, that was a very, very interesting talk, and I will also try to touch on different elements perhaps. But I'm going to start with an introduction of, a little bit of context of myself. So throughout my master's release, where I discovered the power of network analysis, which is really a technique to understand ecosystems. And I'm really interested in promoting innovation. So this was actually very insightful when I discovered it. And now that I am an innovation delivery manager in the Catapult, I'm bringing these approaches. There's a lot of work already happening around building ecosystems. And some of the methodologies I'm bringing are about seeing. So that element you mentioned, Nadim, of seeing these ecosystems what the Catapult does a lot of doing. So let me start just very briefly with what is a Digital Catapult. And we are the UK authority on advanced digital technologies. So we promote different technologies, networks of the future, quantum, AI, and others. And the purpose is to drive growth in the UK economy. So we create new opportunities through collaboration and innovation. The Catapult started almost 10 years ago and is an innovation intervention by Innovate UK, and is neutral and independent organization with multiple sources of funding. So what do? We deliver acceleration and innovation programs aligned to industry and challenges and themes. We build test beds, pilots, proof of concepts, and new business models. And we facilitate research and development projects, inform policy recommendations, and lead research on emerging tech trends. And we work with a variety of stakeholders where we build ecosystems. We work with the government, startups, corporates, industry, investors, academia, and the wider Catapult network. So for us, it's very important to make sure we're building these ecosystems and nurturing them across different technologies. So what do we do in ecosystem building? So national ecosystems require programs and bring stakeholders together to develop new technologies and enable collaboration. And we open access to new technologies, emerging technologies in particular, for innovation and industry organizations, for new hardware, software, to increase capabilities and interoperability. We develop frameworks for innovation, for collaboration across innovation hubs in a variety of programs, leveraging ecosystem capabilities. And we facilitate sector-wide and cross-sector knowledge, learning and dissemination, with toolkits for industry and early-stage technology. So that's a little bit of the motivation. And I will show you some examples of the methodologies we're bringing. The element I'm really excited as I'm contributing here is in the visualization of these ecosystems, how we can see them. All these fantastic work we do around nurturing these ecosystems, how can we understand them better? So my goal is going to show you a few examples and why it's important for us. And why we want to visualize it. And I think Nadim just touched on this, but it allows us to deepen our understanding. There's a lot of complexity when you're trying to create and bring new technologies. For example, in quantum computing, it's a project I'm working on. And you need to understand what are the actors, how can you nurture them, how can you support them. So when you have this picture, you can reduce complexity and streamline a storytelling, showcasing impact and planning further interventions. And as I mentioned, the way to visualize this is through a lens of based on network analysis. So the example on the right, I'm going to go a little bit more in detail, but it's basically based on that. And what is network analysis? It's very simple. The nodes are the entities that we're analyzing. These are the actors, the organizations, it could even be people. And the links are the ties between these entities. They represent relationships. So when we're mapping these relationships, we can analyze this through network analysis. And therefore, I will show you an example because I think the easiest way to understand this is through that. So bear with me as I'm going to be changing screen. Great. So for example, I'm going to tell you what the Sonic Labs program is about, which is one of the largest projects we run on the Catapult in the telecommunications sectors, as we are trying to build a vibrant ecosystem of suppliers of 5G providers in very simple terms. But basically, we are the organizers of the program. We have our funder, which is the department DICIT, the Department of Science and Technology, and we have Ofcom as a partner. And Sonic Labs has been created as one of the programs where we are going to bring several stakeholders to collaborate. And we have we want to enable this collaboration. So we're bringing a variety of vendors that are going to be working in our program. So you can see cohort 1, cohort 2, cohort 4, cohort 3. Basically, throughout more than 2 years, we've been creating these programs consistently to build this vibrant ecosystem and to ensure actors can collaborate. But that comes to life when we can actually see the connections. And that's really powerful for us because we can see how we're bringing different vendors together to collaborate and exchange knowledge, capabilities, technology, creating interoperability that it's aimed at improving 5G deployment in the future. So the infrastructure that will allow us to have better 5G in the UK. So through a map like this, we can tell quite a complex story. And that's one of the things we're trying to do with this type of methodologies. We can also see different things like who are the more important actors in the ecosystem that you're building, those that have the most connections. You can also, for example, tell this narrative of there's a few actors, there's an oligopoly, and in the right, you're seeing an emerging ecosystem arising because of this program and the interventions. We can see how we're bringing stakeholders all across the world to collaborate, to exchange technology and enable interoperability. So coming a little bit back at what this is telling us and why it's important. So through this, we can understand the flow of resources in a network because innovation is inherently interdisciplinary and multifunctional. We can see where the different actors we're bringing together. Innovation also prospers in dynamic ecosystems. If we think of Silicon Valley, it's a very vibrant, very diverse ecosystem, and we want to nurture that. We want to make sure startups are collaborating with large corporations, incubators, venture capital, and so on. So it's important to have dynamic ecosystems. Now the combination of different actors also enables innovation. And one important rationale behind this is addressing network failures, which is one type of market failure, really important in this case, and is when you have different networks of stakeholders that might not be collaborating. We need to make sure they're productively aligned. And some key concepts here, and I think this is quite interesting. So some of the things that can hinder innovation, for example, is when you have fragmented networks. So for example, here, there's a network of London and the driving network and the bike network. If that is disconnected and the information is not flowing, you can have a lock-in, so when you're not able to transition into new technologies. The absence of weak ties is actually really interesting because you might think that a very dense and tight ecosystem might be what you want, but actually if you can have in the periphery of your ecosystem different connections and sources of knowledge, this will be a novel source of information and innovation. So therefore you want to be permeable to your environment. Homophily is also a very important concept. We tend to associate with actors that are just like us. We want to make sure there's heterophily, that we have different actors working together. And in the tech sector, the lack of interoperability. So when services and products and technologies cannot work together, we have issues, and therefore we need to enable standards and for technologies to work together. So that's some of the motivation. I have other examples for, and depends how much time I have left. Brunali, how long more do I have?
There's some time. You could take more, like 5 minutes or a bit more as well.
Fantastic. So this, for example, is around quantum, and this is one of the projects I'm working on. So quantum computing is an emerging technology that is just starting, and through our Open Innovation Program, we have bring different stakeholders to collaborate and understand the use of quantum. So make sure there's adoption of the technology by end users. And we're working on that. It's actually really exciting. even if you are not into technology, as it is, I think, completely novel. And it's an ecosystem that is not overcrowded yet. There's few actors. So through our program, we are bringing key different partners to collaborate. And what we're doing when we're working on this, it's mapping this ecosystem and understanding how we can connect it better, how we can accelerate innovation. From previous types of different analysis, you can also see different actors that might work under public funding. And this is an example from Horizon 2020. And in this map, you can see different types of organization, and the labels are different, represent different groups. So for example, in a network like this, you might want to see and identify that the private sector in purple is not really represented. So what is that telling you in this network? And maybe how could you incentivize the private sector to get involved? And this sort of map can tell you that quite easily. And you can scale the size of different actors relative to different parameters. In this case, it was the quantity of funding that they received. This is also quite interesting. This is from my master supervisor, Daniela Rotolo. So he mapped the evolution of ecosystems around the network of microneedle technologies. Microneedles are a type of drug that you can put in your skin with very small needles. And so he mapped it over time to understand the evolution. And at the beginning of an emerging technology, you have a few actors, they're separated, they're not working together. As time progresses, they start to collaborate, they start to join together, and then you often see one big core emerging, like a research institution, for example, that is bringing those stakeholders together. And you can see similar things for countries below, where you have different countries that have become more prominent in the collaboration and development of science and technology. You can measure these looking at patents, publication, and for market adoption, you can look at other types of data from corporations, spin-offs, and so on. Finally, tools. There's a variety of tools you can use, and we're exploring different ones in the Catapult. I don't really need to cover it much here, but you can go as deep as you want in the tools. The one we actually quite like, and we've used also with JAWS in the past, is Kumu, because it's quite flexible and doesn't need any types of coding. So I think that's it from my side, and I'm looking forward to discussing a little bit more with you now. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Daniela. Again, a very insightful presentation, and thank you for the tools as well. I think tools in Canvas is always a great insight for everyone to get started, because, yeah, that becomes a starting point. Okay, that's it. I think we can go into a Q&A section. Just, do you have anything else, or just questions to go ahead with?
Yeah, let's jump into questions.
Okay. Is there anyone who, I mean, feel free to raise a hand and we can take a question as well. Or if you have any question, you can drop in the chat. So yeah, I guess until we get any question, I could just kick off the Q&A section and start maybe a question across the panel, and trying to see, like, since I mean, because we got like a insights into like how you all have had an experience working towards building an ecosystem. If when you look into if you were to look into like things that will happen in the future, or upcoming things, or if you were to look at upcoming trends and challenges, is there anything specific that you see as a big challenge which people should be taking in consideration, and what they can prepare towards it, or modify as they go towards building an impactful ecosystem? Any it is across if anybody wants to get started. or just
Yeah,
have any
I
insight there?
mean, I guess you're talking about challenges, and I think there's lots of those. Finding if you're doing something new, and it's different, and it may not exist already, and it may be something that people need to believe in because it doesn't exist. And it may be a bit abstract too, right? If you think about if you go into an area and you start talking about an ecosystem that doesn't exist, that's quite an abstract thing. That's maybe difficult for people to get their hands on. It's difficult for them to have a sense of it as a real thing, you know, when it doesn't exist. Again, I gave that example in London. If you go back 30 years ago and talk to people then, they probably wouldn't have believed that we'd be here now in this kind of vibrant ecosystem that we have. So I think there's that challenge of helping people believe in something that doesn't exist yet. Something, and we talk about ecosystems, we talk about this network of connections. It's not individual organizations or anything. So it's quite abstract in a certain sense. And I think a lot of people struggle with that, particularly institutions, right? Believing in something that doesn't exist. So how do you get that buy-in? How do you tell that story? How do you bring it alive? How do you give them a sense of that something's possible that doesn't exist yet? You're trying to create a new level in a system, right? You have all these parts at the moment that are doing all these things, and all they know is those things and those parts. And you've got to get them to believe in actually there's something more here. There's another possibility, you know? And I think that's the thing I struggle with a lot. And in the two loops model there, you're showing about, you know, the really early adopters, those people. I think those are the people you have to work with. You have to find the people who actually care about this thing enough to believe in something different, because most people don't. And it's difficult and challenging to find those people and then connect them and develop them and so forth. So I'd say that's core to it. Yeah, core challenge.
I think, sorry,
go ahead.
just wanted I wanted to add to this. I mean, you came back to the two-loop model just, and one thing I understood also through some of the mappings and interventions that we did was, I mean, first of all, two things. This whole framework approach helps you better describe those initial adopter, right? So, you know, whether you assign them roles, whether you're looking at which sector or which type of actors they are, it just helps put that story together. Who are these early adopters? What do they do? What roles do they play? So this sort of storytelling, which I just saw in the chat that Yasmin was mentioning, seems to help at the initial stages of describing that initial group of people and what it is they're trying to achieve. So that's just insight number one, but exactly, naming. Number two was, in terms of when we do the mapping and identifying those actors, it seemed to be equally important. And I use this term within mission-oriented innovation because I was saying, okay, if we map one ecosystem, that's the mission-oriented ecosystem, then it's equally as important to map the mission-resistant ecosystem. So it's sort of naming what are forces that are in play that are actually prohibiting that ecosystem. What is, you know, who are the incumbents that basically have every incentive in place to keep the system as it currently is. And this is not a, you know, this against this type of thing, but it's just a question of understanding what type of storytelling approach do you have, who are your allies, and who do you just need to work much, much harder to convince. And obviously, yes, there will be people who will just be standing against that ecosystem moving in a specific direction. So that's another thing I just wanted to say.
Yeah, and also I think to add, I think when you are starting on this type of work, the most important is to develop a language, a common language that you can use together in the organization or in any ecosystem you're building to understand what you're talking about first. So it's almost like, first of all, you need to pave the way, you know, bring these concepts that will help you. And I think going back to what you said, the why, it's going to be your most important point for the ecosystem. Why are you doing this? Why is it going to benefit your community? Why is it important? Why is it urgent? So I think defining those elements definitely really important. And there's many perspectives in the ecosystem literature. For example, once you start to dive into different articles or publications, there's as many perspectives as you want. And I think that's also what makes it interesting. There's no one correct way, as you saw from 3 different presentations today. There's different perspectives on to how to analyze ecosystems, how to build them. So, for example, I focus more in this network analysis approach, but there's more, other social aspects you can look at. So I think it's an interesting area to work because you have also the ability to shape it. It's not all set in stone. The literature is not completely clear.
Yeah, I think also, if I learn from own experience, the mistake I make is not to spend enough time listening and trying to understand the people, because then you have your own preconception about them and what they want and what should happen here, and you go in and you tell a story that doesn't resonate with people, and you'll discover that after a while, right? Because no one engages, no one wants to be part of it. It doesn't speak to them, And I think when you get to that point, then you have to step back and say, actually, I need to listen. I need to try and figure these people out and this situation out better, and go back to that, and really build something from that. So I think the challenge and my learning is not to rush into it, to take time to listen and really understand, where people are coming from and understand the system instead of just your idea of what it should be, right? Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'll just quickly move on to the next 2-3 questions that we've got in the chat. So first question from Nina. She says, I understand all the potential gains about ecosystem approaches, but I wonder how this relates to actual policy making or projects where there are few incentives for collaboration or where actors' power and agency is very unequal and so many structural and cultural constraints for alignment prevail. I think more maybe to just it, I think in a more organizational, in a corporate setting, I think general challenges that you come across through different actors, through organizational structure as well and leadership, I think more in towards that. How do you kind of get across that? But of course, if Nina, if you want to expand it, if you want to expand on your question, feel free to do that as well.
Perhaps I could. Nina can expand. Yeah.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, no, I was thinking of doing this kind of work in Kenya and East Africa, where you have completely not only different language and cultures, but where these kind of approaches may sound attractive to a small group of people, and then are kind of put forward, but then also die or don't really prosper because I think maybe the constraints have not been mapped properly, or there were no incentives to really just understand the trade-offs of doing this. So, I'm just thinking of like importing these different approaches across very different regions.
I can speak to that a little bit. I think there'll always be something that the group of actors working in isolation can't achieve, or a problem they have at a collective level. And ultimately, you have to communicate that to them and make them experience that. And it may actually take time, right? There may be, because systems and social groups go through different phases, right? And there are phases when they're very sure about what they know and the way the world works and what they're trying to achieve. And it's very difficult to influence a system at that stage. And it may actually mean you have to wait for the right time. So if you think about something, the rise of sustainability and that whole paradigm or climate change, no one was interested in really listening to that 40 years ago. Fast forward 40 years, and now we have a lot of signals coming to us, and people aren't so sure now that we're on the right track and that they think we do need to change, and they're a lot more receptive to that. And they recognize also that they can't solve that problem as individuals. So I think it's that thing of helping them experience both the challenges and the opportunities of why they need to work together, the opportunities for them working together, but also that this challenge can't be addressed if we simply do it in isolation, and also seeing where they are they ready, are they receptive to that, or what needs to happen for them to kind of progress in that direction. Yeah.
And in addition to what Joe said, I think there's, I mean, maybe two insights coming, one from some involvement in a project in Panama, and the other from talking to a policymaker who actually challenged me a lot on all of these frameworks. So in the Panama project, there was a big or initial ecosystem mapping done on a Miro board, and then we planned it out, what should be the roadmap, and then they started inviting all of these stakeholders to meetings to try to discuss a zero waste policy, I think, in some food market in Panama City. And what was reported was that that first meeting became a bit of a meeting of sharing grievances, like, we can't work with you because, and so tactically, the answer is, it's just a question of trust building at the beginning and understand and listening, right, as Josh said. And I tie this to what I heard from the policymaker here in Europe, which was more like, all of these frameworks are great, and missions, and asking even the why, or even projecting what the why should be as someone coming from outside. But the reality of the matter is, if there's a group of people who identified that they have a current problem and they're trying to work towards it, if you try to latch on to what they're working on, try to enlarge the group, you're obviously going to have what basically, ends up being the let's say the group who are willing to stick together and to keep working on this. And just practically speaking, that's what you just move forward with. I mean, it's great to have all of these different roles covered, but at some point, it is about also these small gains and seeing what emerge with every iteration, basically, of what the output of that ecosystem can be. And I think this is what, yes, I did use it in another conversation the other day, and they told me, well, it has a historical connotation. So, like, okay, and basically what was said is, and I think this is what some groups are doing within, Climate Kick is trying to do with these deep demonstrations, is how can you sort of package these types of outcomes to demonstrate what that ecosystem is capable of doing, and then perhaps start to bring on either deniers, people who are obstacles, or just other people from the ecosystem that you need to scale that, where you just need to start slow. That's what I'll say.
I think a very small point to add here is perhaps on the incentive. So our mission in the Digital Catapult is clear, in the sense we're trying to grow the UK economy. Everyone wants to be part of that. And in previous programs where I work in international development in Sub-Saharan Africa, the programs were always incentivized at trying to create a sustainable livelihood, a source of income somehow through that ecosystem that can sustain your livelihood, because that's something people care so much about. So if you're trying to incentivize, let's say the creation of sustainable startups, it all comes down to can this be sustained over time? Can we have the right incentives? Can we have the support? So again, the why needs to be, I think, very, very clear. That's what I would add.
Yeah, I think it's also relevant, relative. Everything's relative in this kind of work. You're always dealing with real people, real situations, and so forth. But it's also relative to how new is this thing that you're introducing. If you take what Daniela is doing with technology, I think the actors there already understand the value that this can create, right? Because it's a technology that, yeah, it's not in the world yet, but they've already seen what the value technology can bring to the economy, and so on and so forth. Maybe if you're introducing something else like systems innovation, where those actors don't really understand what the hell is this, and so forth, it's quite a different scenario. And I do find that idea, coalition of the willing, I know it's not the best term, but the actual phrase itself really captures a lot for me, because Quite often when you're introducing something very new, most of the actors won't get it. They won't understand, particularly the institutions, the incumbents. They may say, yes, I like that, but they won't do anything. So really you have to find the people who are the willing, the people who care about this. And maybe that's a very small group, and you have to work with them and grow from that. If it's a very new thing, you have to really start with, those people who actually care, have the intrinsic motivation and so forth, because a lot of the incumbents really won't be interested for a long time. You'll have to grow something before they'll start to get interested.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, my mic changed, so I was confused. Okay, I'm just gonna look at the time as well, gonna quickly take in the last 2-3 questions. We have a question from Yasmin about storytelling. So, the question.
Yeah, I can just quickly mention, but I think there are other questions here that you can address because we quickly talked about it.
Hello.
Yeah, Nadim, maybe you want to pull up your one, Nadim? Did you?
Yeah, let's. I mean, we'll pull it up, but let's also take Judith maybe and see which of those makes sense, because mine or that person's question was quite. I think it's a bit of a tangent, but quite relevant from an ecosystem to an ecosystem approach. So he says, how does an ecosystem live in ourselves? What is our relationship? What is the movement that it creates when looking inside to our own environment? And the reason why I thought there was, I don't know if Rolf is with us actually, but the reason why I thought this was interesting is this idea from, looking from ecosystem to ecosystem, this trust building approach, but also looking at that when we need a systems transformation, yes, we need an ecosystem to transform a specific system, but we need inner transformation, right, as well. It's all about our own journeys. That's kind of what I took from this question, but yeah, if that's worth tackling within the group, you let me know, but I know that I saw that Judith also has a question.
Yeah, we also talk about ecosystem thinking, right? I saw that comment earlier on and made me think of that, because you have to change your modality of kind of thinking and so forth, don't you? Instead of just trying to find the solution yourself, you've got to be thinking outwards and in a more holistic and kind of inclusive, non-linear way. And that's a way of thinking, a way of being also. So, yeah. So are there any communities building tools available for growing ecosystems? You could certainly take a look at SI for sure. We have some
yeah, exactly. That's what I was going to say. Joint systems innovation. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we'll be there's a link we'll be sharing again. I think Joss had put it. You'll have some more direct references available after the panel, so that's something that'd be useful. I have another question from Judith, which is how to draw. The question says how to draw a border for an ecosystem. What are the working variables, also to make a network and exchange not too overwhelming.
Is this for visualization or you for visualizing?
I thought about collaboration, not just visualization, although that's also an interesting question.
Yeah,
but thought about like maybe purpose, and of course, if you're talking about regional ecosystems, that's easier. But from your experience, where do you say like, okay, let's make a cut here?
Yeah, I could quickly say a word because that was one of my learnings from, actually, I showed you that graphic of the London hub network of organizations, right? Over 240 of them. And we did that. And then after realized just how complex that is, right? And we can't actually bite all that off. So it gets to your whole point. It's definitely relative to your capacity, right? What can you deal with? Do you have a larger organization that's able to actually bring all that information in, process it, and build those networks and platforms and all that capacity to orchestrate a large ecosystem like that, like the Digital Catapult maybe does, or are you just a small organization that has limited capacity? So it's really about doing what's possible and understanding your capacity at any given time, and then kind of iterating from that. So I think it's, getting the right frame of reference for what you're really capable of and what you're able to do at this time.
Yeah, I will add to that, the boundary of your analysis, it's something you can define in terms of, okay, this is where I'm going to focus on. But also you don't need to be the orchestrator to understand an ecosystem and your role in the ecosystem. So you for example, you can map where the actors, how they're interacting, what they're doing, and then decide what is the role you're going to play in that ecosystem. And might be a minor role, not being an orchestrator, but somehow enabling connections with less resources, for example, if you're a smaller organization. And that could also be an effective way to do that. I hope that answers the question.
And maybe a short comment that in some workshops, I think when I try to facilitate SDG related workshops, I have a couple of questions that I usually ask to frame and to understand the relevance of specific SDGs to an organization. I say, what are we really trying to have an impact on? But also to understand the relations between the SDGs. What do you think should be in place? Or in another way, what are the SDGs that should be achieved for you to be able to have an impact yourself within your project? And I think that sort of question guides also the boundary setting of an ecosystem, right? Because it's about, for me, I think identifying, when you start naming those initial actors, look at who's doing what work, but maybe starting with who has potentially the biggest leverage in order to help you achieve the impact or the purpose of that ecosystem, but also what needs to be placed. Basically, if there's no way to move forward without there being some type of regulation change, then you need regulators on the table. At which stage of the ecosystem process, I think that's very much a bit of an emergence. As Joss was saying, it relates to it's basically a bit of a strategy, and I think it changes every time. Too early, and they're gonna just, it's gonna burn. Too late, they're gonna say, hey, you didn't involve us. So it really is a very much of an experience-based thing that emerges, I feel. That's why I don't think there's that specific answer to that.
Yeah, thank you. Just thinking maybe we have time for one last question. We have a question from Lisa, but I think instead of reading out, if Lisa is still on the call, it'd be nice to hear from you about the question.
Thank you so much. This is so valuable, and it's the question is emerging. I was thinking about Nadim, you mentioned kind of a way of hosting these spaces as facilitators, and that two-loop model of the dying system as the new is emerging. But that space in between, it strikes me that we're composting this trauma and unintegrated energy, and especially working with young people who do say, so what? For that grief and instability that is present, but not really felt embodied, and then we're using language that's putting us in that rational, analytical, and English may not be our first language, and English is very much about subject-object rather than aware of the environment. I'm just curious about any reflections on the possibilities when so many of us, because of the imprint throughout school and work systems, don't encourage our feelings to be expressed. We don't have that language so easily. I mean, I always do a kind of coherence exercise at the beginning of a group But I'm really called to work with people from very different positions and mindsets. And I loved the point about mapping to see positionalities and share the stories and have the experiences. So I'm just curious about the possibilities of language or the nonverbal storytelling, perhaps, that we could explore in real time as people are having feelings.
That's a great question and insight. Yeah, I mean, that's very interesting, that intersection between the two paradigms, right? That's where complexity always is, right? It's easy to say in that paradigm or that paradigm, but to be in that place in between and to hold that space exactly. And you know, for the new, it actually means they have to you know, care enough essentially about the old to take something on, the responsibility of that decomposing, which isn't, you know, a very nice thing. And we can think about us and our relation to our parents, because it's the similar relationship, isn't it? Right, about how we take care of our parents as they get older and so forth, because we care about them, right? So I think a lot of this caring is an important factor, and it's difficult to do if you don't have people who actually care about this stuff, you know. But you make a really good point about it's kind of an embodied thing, isn't it? When so much of our culture and education and even this modality of working, right, Zoom, through images and text and language doesn't really encourage that embodied experience. So they're all very relevant and important points. I guess in the end, it's about trying to create those spaces and encourage physical spaces where people kind of experience things in an embodied way, and you connect the two for them to empathize and enable that transition successfully. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the intergenerational factor is huge. So I am a grandmother now, and it's very easy to see myself between 7 generations, me in the middle. And unless we care, you know, those SDGs, unless we care about feeding the babies, animal and human, you know, the perspective is really important. I mean, that's something I hope we would agree on, because our survival depends on that. But so I guess it's relanguaging in ways that people can hear with just enough gaps in the story to be relatable. But I do really believe that we're building on the ancestors in the soil and in the atmosphere.
Yeah, and the point is that that's the only way to get sustainable change, isn't it? Because the other way, forgetting about the past and shooting off into the future, it's not really sustainable. You end up going around in circles, don't you? So if you really care about really making that transition and really seeing something different come into the world and a real sustainable, real deep change, then that's the only way of doing it. But it's messy and complex and super difficult. So yeah, that's a whole nother conversation, as Nadim says, I think.
Yeah, it's also hard on our bodies, right? So yeah, it's something about resourcing and nourishment, true nourishment. It would be interesting to explore together.
Amazing, thank you. I think looking at the time would also, yeah, thank you for the very last interesting question. Brought in a lot of perspectives to it. Yeah, I think this. Is there any other last comments if anybody from the panel would like to add before we close session? Nadim?
I'm just 2 resources or maybe topics people can read about, because this was popped up in the questions. So one of them is, how can we, like, this idea of storytelling and imagining what the result of the work of the ecosystem could be. So there's a lot of work on collective imagination and imagination infrastructures. You look up these terms, it's a lot to not go into details now. And then on what you mentioned, Lisa, but maybe still at a more abstract level, there's work done also on relational infrastructures between people. So how do you make sure that you build those relationships so that they're more conducive towards change later? So these are just 2 things. I think Sam Rye did some work. He wrote about relational infrastructures. So 2 things I mentioned, but yeah, beyond that, I think what your question, Lisa, is worth digging deeper into.
Yes, I also wanted to add some kind of final points, and I was thinking about what you were saying, Lisa, about, you know, emergent kind of with this really great map, the dominant system and the emerging system. I think right now we're going through a huge technological revolution with artificial intelligence, and that's impacting our lives in multiple ways. And we see resistance, we see a lot of people feeling threatened. And in a place like the Catapult, we really ask ourselves, how can we develop responsible technology? And it's also, it's about caring. It's about caring what people think, what people are feeling, and how they feel, you know, AI that kind of taking over their lives. So it's really important to have that balance, and we try to think about that. And the final point I wanted to raise is, it's in terms of ecosystem thinking and that question, Nadim, about you know, how that ecosystem lives in you. I think once you start thinking about ecosystems, you actually start to analyze your whole network in the same way. You start to see these connections. You start to kind of see them visible. And I think that's actually, I have found it's a great advantage, because you see the connections between people and how you can make things happen. So I think definitely I have found it useful. That's it.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you, Daniela and Nadim. Thank you, everyone. It was very insightful presentations. We got to know a lot from the examples which you present, and I'm sure, like, I think everyone got a lot of tools and references to get started with this. Just maybe to end off, feel free to kind of connect on our platform. Whoever's probably not joined the platform, connect on LinkedIn. If you still have questions, feel free to drop them on our post. I think it will start up conversation and continue this ahead as well. And maybe just to highlight one of our next events for the London Hub, we have our meetups. That is the next one that's going to come in. We'll probably put in a bit other events, so keep a track on it. Our meetup is in March, 14th March. So if anyone's, for people who are based in London, that's a great in-person event. Also to meet people interested within systems innovation as well. But I think that's it for today evening. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending and giving your time, and hope you had an insightful session as well. And again,